A scream echoes through the 4:50 train from Paddington. A young woman lies dead, a silk scarf tight around her throat. Who is the viper? What deadly secret hides in a golden pocket watch? Miss Jane Marple, an unassuming spinster with a mind, overhears a chilling plot on a bustling platform. From cryptic ciphers to a shadowy auction house, a gunshot on a speeding train to a forgotten manor secrets, she unravels a web of espionage and betrayal. Will she unmask the killer before the next 4:50 departs? Or will the viper's fangs strike again? Chapter 1. The Whispers on the Platform. The platform at Paddington Station buzzed with the restless energy of a late afternoon in autumn, the air thick with the scent of coal smoke and damp wool. Miss Jane Marple stood near a wrought iron bench, her small suitcase at her feet, her gloved hands clasped around a worn leather handbag. Her eyes, bright and sharp beneath the brim of her sensible hat, darted across the crowd. She was not one to fidget, but her fingers twitched slightly, itching for the knitting needles tucked safely in her bag. The 4:50 train to St. Mary Mead was due in 10 minutes, and Miss Marple, ever punctual, had arrived early to observe. The station was a tapestry of human stories. A young couple bickering over a missed connection, a porter hauling a creaking trolley, a businessman snapping his newspaper with impatience. But it was the two men near the ticket barrier who caught her attention. They stood apart from the throng, their heads bent close, their voices low but urgent. One was tall, with a hawkish nose and a coat too fine for the drizzle-soaked platform. The other was shorter, wiry, his cap pulled low over eyes that flicked nervously toward the crowd. Miss Marple, with her knack for blending into the scenery, edged closer, pretending to study a timetable posted on a nearby pillar. ... MUSTN, single quotes, TB late. The tall man hissed, his voice clipped with an accent Miss Marple couldn't quite place. Eastern European, perhaps. The delivery is on the 4:50. No mistakes this time. The wiry man shifted, his fingers drumming against his thigh. I told you, I've got it handled. But if she suspects, she won't. The tall man cut in, his tone sharp as a blade. Not if you do your part. The package is secure. The wiry man nodded, glancing at a battered leather satchel slung across his shoulder. It's all there. But what if no what-ifs? The tall man snapped. Get on that train, and don't look back. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. A delivery, a package. Her mind, honed by years of unraveling village intrigues, spun with possibilities. She adjusted her scarf, stepping closer to a newsstand as if to browse the evening papers. The men didn't notice her few ever did, which was precisely why she was so effective. The tall man turned abruptly, striding toward the station's exit, while the wiry one lingered, his gaze sweeping the platform. For a moment, his eyes met hers, and Miss Marple offered a vague, grandmotherly smile. He looked away, clutching the satchel tighter, and hurried toward the platform's edge. The whistle of the 4:50 train shrieked through the station, and the crowd surged forward. Miss Marple joined the flow, her small frame surprisingly nimble as she boarded a second-class carriage. She settled into a window seat, her handbag on her lap, and pulled out her knitting a soft blue shawl she was making for her neighbors. Newborn. The needles clicked rhythmically, a soothing counterpoint to the chatter around her. But her eyes remained alert, scanning the carriage for the wiry man. He was nowhere in sight. The train lurched forward, the platform sliding away as London's grey rooftops gave way to the blur of suburbs. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the conversation she'd overheard. A delivery, a package, a woman who might suspect something vague, yet tantalizing. She had no proof of wrongdoing, but her instincts, sharpened by decades of quiet observation, told her something was amiss. She glanced at the other passengers, a tired-looking mother with a squirming toddler, an elderly man dozing over a crossword, a young woman in a smart red coat reading a novel. Nothing unusual, yet Miss Marple felt a prickle of unease. The train rattled on, the countryside unfolding in patches of green and gold. Miss Marple was halfway through a row of stitches when a piercing scream shattered the carriage's calm. Heads turned, murmurs rippling through the compartment. The scream came again, sharp and desperate, from the first-class carriage ahead. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her movements deliberate but swift. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and made her way toward the connecting door, ignoring the curious stares of her fellow passengers. The first-class carriage was a stark contrast to her own plush seats, polished wood and a hushed elegance disrupted by the chaos at its center. A conductor, red-faced and flustered, stood over a young woman slumped in her seat, her head lolled against the window, her face pale as porcelain. A silk scarf, vibrant green with gold threads, was knotted tightly around her throat. Miss Marple's breath caught, but her expression remained composed. She stepped closer, her eyes taking in every detail: the woman's manicured nails, her expensive but slightly scuffed shoes, the single glove black leather, finely made resting on the seat beside her. "She's dead," the conductor stammered, his hands trembling as he loosened the scarf. "Strangled, by the look of it. I need to stop the train." Miss Marple's gaze flicked to the glove. It was too small for a man's hand, and the woman wore no matching one. Odd, she thought, filing it away. "Perhaps you should alert the authorities first," she suggested gently, her voice calm but firm, "and ensure no one leaves this carriage." The conductor blinked, startled by her authority, but nodded. "Right, yes, of course." He hurried toward the communication cord, barking orders at a porter who hovered nearby. Miss Marple knelt beside the body, careful not to touch anything. The woman was young, perhaps 25, with auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a stylish hat. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, stared at the ceiling. A small handbag lay open at her feet, its contents spilled across the floor: a lipstick, a compact, a train ticket stub. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on a crumpled piece of paper half hidden beneath the seat. She hesitated, then used the tip of her umbrella to nudge it into view. It was a note, scrawled in hasty ink: "For 50, don't be late, Viper." Her pulse quickened. Viper, the word echoed the conversation she'd overheard. She glanced around, no one was watching. With a deft movement, she slipped the note into her handbag, her face betraying nothing. The other passengers in the carriage, a mix of shocked businessmen and a trembling, elderly couple, were too distracted to notice. Miss Marple straightened, her mind racing. The wiry man, the package, the Viper, were they connected to this poor girl's death? A young man in a tweed suit pushed through the crowd, his face pale. "What's happened?" he demanded, his voice cracking as she "Dead, I'm afraid," Miss Marple said softly, studying him. His eyes were wide, but there was something in his posture too stiff, too controlled. "Did you know her?" He shook his head quickly, almost too quickly. No, I just heard the scream. Terrible business." He backed away, disappearing into the growing crowd of onlookers. The train slowed as the conductor pulled the emergency brake. the screech of metal on metal jarring the passengers. Miss Marple returned to her seat in the second-class carriage, her knitting untouched. She closed her eyes, piecing together the fragments, the whispered conversation, the glove, the note, the young man's unease. The police would arrive soon, and they would likely call it a robbery gone wrong or a crime of passion. But Miss Marple knew better. There was a pattern here, a thread waiting to be unravelled. As the train came to a halt, she opened her eyes and glanced out the window. The platform was empty, save for a lone figure in the distance, the tall man from the station, his coat flapping as he vanished into the dusk. Miss Marple's lips pressed into a thin line. She had no proof, no clear motive, but she had something. Better, a puzzle, and puzzles, as her old friend Dolly Bantry often said, were Miss Marple's specialty. She gathered her things, tucking the note deeper into her handbag. The police would ask questions, and she would answer them vaguely, politely, as an elderly spinster should. But her mind was already on the next step. The 450 killer, as the newspapers would no doubt call him, had made a mistake. He'd left. A glove, a note, a trail, and Miss Marple, with her quiet persistence and unassuming air, was just the person to follow it. The carriage door opened, and a policeman stepped inside, his notebook ready. Miss Marple smiled, her knitting needles clicking once more. The game, as Sherlock Holmes might have said, was afoot, and she intended to play it to the end. Chapter 2. The strangers cipher the village of St. Mary Mead welcomed. Miss Jane Marple, back with its familiar embrace, the soft hum of bees in Mrs. Pemberton's garden, the distant chime of the church bell, and the gossip that fluttered like leaves in the autumn breeze. Miss Marple settled into her cosy sitting room at Dame Mead Cottage, a tray of tea and scones on the table beside her. Her knitting lay untouched, her thoughts still tethered to the grim scene on the 4:50 train. The police had swarmed the carriage, their questions brisk but predictable. Miss Marple had offered little, her answers vague, her demeanour that of a harmless old lady. But the note tucked in her handbag, "For 50, don't be late, Viper," burned in her mind like a hidden ember. She sipped her tea, Earl Grey with a hint of bergamot, and considered her next move. The newspapers, delivered that morning, screamed of the 450 killer, painting the murder of Clara Henshaw as a sensational tragedy. Clara, they reported, was a courier for a discreet London antiques dealer, a job that took her across the country delivering rare artifacts to wealthy clients. The police suspected a robbery, the scarf around her neck a mere tool of opportunity. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Robbery, indeed. The single glove, the coded note, the whispered talk of a delivery on the platform, these were not the trappings of a petty thief. She reached for the note, smoothing it on the table. The handwriting was jagged, as if written in haste. The ink smudged at the edges. Viper. The word carried a venomous weight, a name or a code, perhaps both. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to her nephew, Raymond West, a writer with a knack for puzzles and a network of contacts in London. He was due to visit tomorrow, but this couldn't wait. She picked up the telephone, her fingers steady as she dialed his number. "Raymond, dear," she said when he answered, her voice warm but edged with purpose. "I need your help with a little problem. Could you come this evening? And perhaps bring that cipher book you were so fond of last summer." Raymond, ever indulgent of his aunt's whims, arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village. He was a lanky man in his 30s, with a mop of dark hair and a penchant for dramatic gestures. Aunt Jane, he said, dropping into an armchair, you sounded positively cryptic on the phone. What's this about a cipher? Miss Marple handed him the note, her eyes gleaming. I found this on the train yesterday, near poor Clara Henshaw. I believe it's important. Raymond's eyebrows shot up as he read it. Viper sounds like something out of a spy novel, and you just happened to find this. I was observant, she said mildly, pouring him tea. Now, can you make sense of it? Raymond pulled a dog-eared book from his satchel, its cover embossed with codes and ciphers, a modern guide. He flipped through it, muttering about substitution, ciphers, and numeric patterns. Miss Marple watched, her knitting needles clicking softly as she resumed her shawl. After an hour of scribbling and cross-referencing, Raymond leaned back, triumphant. It's a simple shift cipher, he said. The numbers for 50 aren't just a time, they're a key. Shift the letters in Viper by 4 positions, and you get ... He scribbled on a notepad, ... single quotes, Z, MVIT, ... single quotes. No, that's nonsense. Wait 5 positions, not 4. He tried again. Amulet. That's a word. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. Amulet. Interesting. And the meeting time. The note's too short for more, Raymond admitted. But amulet could be a name, a place, or an object. Given Clara's job, maybe it's an artifact. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already racing. Clara, a courier for antiques, might have been carrying something called the amulet, but why kill her? And why leave the note? She thanked Raymond, who left with a promise to dig into London's antiques underworld. Alone again, Miss Marple turned to the newspaper, scanning for details. A small article mentioned Clara's employer, Mr. Gideon Voss, a reclusive dealer, with a shop in Mayfair. Miss Marple made a mental note to visit, but first she needed to know more about Clara the next morning. She took the early train to London, her handbag heavier with purpose. Clara's boarding house, a narrow brick building in Bloomsbury, smelled of cabbage and wax polish. The landlady, Mrs. Tuttle, was a wiry woman with a pinched face and a penchant for gossip. Clara was a quiet girl, she said, leading Miss Marple to Clara's room. Paid on time, kept to herself. Such a shame. What happened? The room was Spartan. A single bed, a wardrobe, a desk cluttered with papers. Miss Marple, under the pretense of delivering a condolence from St. Mary Mead's church, examined the space. A locked drawer caught her eye. Might I look at her things? She asked, her tone gentle. For the memorial. Mrs. Tuttle hesitated, then handed over a key. Suppose it's no harm now. The drawer yielded a treasure, a photograph, creased and faded, showing Clara holding a pocket watch. Its face was ornate, with Roman numerals and a tiny inscription. Miss Marple couldn't read. Tucked behind it was a receipt from Voss Antiques, dated a week ago, for the delivery of one item, confidential. Miss Marple's heart quickened. The watch, the amulet, were they one and the same? She thanked Mrs. Tuttle and left, the photograph safely in her handbag. Back at the station, she bought a ticket to Mayfair, determined to meet Gideon Voss. The shop was a dim, cluttered space, its windows draped with heavy velvet. Voss, a stooped man with silver hair and darting eyes, greeted her with polite suspicion. Miss Marple, is it? How can I assist? I knew Clara Henshaw. She lied smoothly, her voice soft. Such a tragedy. I understand she worked for you. Voss's face tightened. She was a fine courier, reliable. Her death was unfortunate. Did she handle anything special recently? Miss Marple asked, her eyes wide with innocent curiosity. A watch, perhaps. Voss's hand froze on a ledger. A watch? No, nothing like that. Just routine deliveries. His voice was too quick, his smile too thin. Miss Marple nodded, thanking him and leaving without pressing further. She knew a liar when she saw one. As she stepped into the bustling Mayfair street, her thoughts churned. The photograph, the receipt, Voss's evasionate, all pointed to the pocket watch. Was it the amulet? And why was Clara killed for it? Back in St. Mary Mead that evening, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the photograph on her lap. The watch's inscription was faint, but she made out a single word. Viper. Her breath caught. The note, the cipher, the watch, they were linked, a deadly thread weaving through Clara's murder. The police might call it a robbery, but Miss Marple saw a deeper game, one of secrets and betrayal. She set the photograph aside, her knitting, needles resuming their steady rhythm. Tomorrow she would return to London. The pocket watch was the key, and she would find it no matter how carefully it was hidden. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with quiet determination, her mind already stitching together the next piece of the puzzle. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Auction House. The auction house in Belgravia was a world apart from the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead. Its grand facade, all marble columns and gilded cornices, loomed over the street like a palace of secrets. Miss Jane Marple stepped inside, her modest tweed coat and sensible hat drawing barely a glance from the fur-clad patrons milling about. She carried a programme for the evening's auction, her eyes scanning the crowd with the same quiet intensity she'd once used to spot a pilfered jar of jam at a village fete. The pocket watch, the one from Clara Henshaw's photograph, was listed as Lot 47, described only as a rare timepiece, 18th century, provenance confidential. Miss Marple's lips twitched. Confidentiality, she knew, often cloaked something worth hiding. She took a seat near the back, her handbag on her lap, her knitting needles tucked away for once. The room buzzed with anticipation, chandeliers casting a warm glow over velvet chairs and polished tables laden with artifacts. Miss Marple observed the players, a nervous jeweller with a tick in his left eye, fidgeting with his cufflinks. A woman in a sleek fur stole, her gaze sharp as a hawk's, and a man in a tailored suit, a silver viper-shaped cufflink glinting at his wrist. Her pulse quickened. The viper, or someone connected to him. She made a mental note of his seat, number 3rd row. Ireland settled in to watch. The auctioneer, a wiry man with a voice like polished brass, began the bidding. Paintings and porcelain vases changed hands at dizzying prices, but Miss Marple's attention never wavered from Lot 47. When the pocket watch was announced, a hush fell. The auctioneer held it aloft, its gold case catching the light, its Roman numerals stark against the ivory face. A singular piece, he declared, with a mechanism unlike any other. Bidding starts at £10,000. The jeweller raised, his paddle, his hand trembling. The woman in furs counted, her bid clipped and confident. The man with the viper cufflink leaned forward, his eyes locked on the watch, but he didn't bid. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her handbag. Something was wrong. The air felt charged, like the moment before a storm, then chaos. A fire alarm wailed, shrill and insistent, cutting through the murmurs. The crowd surged toward the exits, voices rising in confusion. Miss Marple stayed seated, her eyes tracking the key players. The jeweller bolted, his coat flapping as he vanished. Through a side door, The woman in furs slipped something a note, perhaps to the viper-cufflinked man, before melting into the crowd. And the auctioneer, with a practised calm that struck Miss Marple as odd, whisked the pocket watch off the podium and into a velvet-lined case. She rose, moving against the tide of panicked bidders. Near the podium, she spotted a scrap of paper. On the floor, torn and smudged. Using her umbrella's tip, she nudged it into her hand. It was half a note, the ink fresh, for 50 King's Cross. Don't miss it. Her heart skipped. Another train, another rendezvous. She tucked the fragment into her handbag, her mind racing. The fire alarm, she suspected, was no accident. It was a diversion meant to halt the auction and spirit the watch away. Outside, the crowd spilled onto the pavement, the night air sharp with the scent of rain. Fire engines wailed in the distance, but Miss Marple saw no smoke, no flames. She scanned the faces around her. The woman in furs was gone, as was the viper-cufflinked man. The jeweller, however, lingered near a lamppost, his eyes darting nervously. Miss Marple approached, her expression one of mild concern. "Oh dear," she said, her voice tremulous, such a frightful commotion. "Are you quite all right, sir?" The jeweller started, his tic more pronounced. "Fine, fine," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. "Just a false alarm, I expect." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, tilting her head. "You seemed keen on that pocket watch. A family heirloom, was it?" His face paled. "No, nothing like that. Just an investment." He turned abruptly, hurrying into the crowd. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind piecing together the fragments. The watch hadn't been sold, it had been withdrawn, spirited away under the cover of chaos. The note in her handbag pointed to King's Cross, the 4:50 train. Another link in the chain that began with Clara's death. The jeweller's nerves, the woman's note, the viper's cufflink, they were all threads in the same tapestry, and Miss Marple was determined to unravel it. She returned to her hotel, a modest establishment near Russell Square, and spread her clues on the bed: Clara's photograph, the coded note from the train, the receipt from Voss Antiques, and now the torn fragment from the auction house. The watch was the key, she was certain, but why? Was it merely valuable, or did it hold a secret perhaps tied to the amulet Raymond had decoded? And who was the viper orchestrating these deadly games? She telephoned Raymond, her voice steady despite the late hour. "Dear boy, I need you to look into something. An auction house in Belgravia, find out who owns it, and if they've any connection to a man called Voss, and check the passenger lists for tomorrow's 4:50 from King's Cross, if you can." Raymond, used to his aunt's cryptic requests, chuckled. "You're up to something, aren't you? I'll see what I can dig up." Miss Marple hung up, her thoughts turning to the viper-cufflinked man. His silence during the bidding, his exchange with the woman in furs, it suggested he was no mere bidder, but a player in a larger scheme. She recalled the tall man from Paddington, his urgent whispers about a delivery. Were they the same man, or was the viper a title, passed among conspirators like a poisoned chalice? She booked a ticket for the 4:50 from King's Cross, her decision made. The train was the next stage, and she would be on it, watching, listening, knitting. The auction house had been a battlefield of glances and secrets, but the real war lay ahead. Miss Marple folded the torn note, her fingers brushing the photograph of the watch. Its inscription, Viper, seemed to pulse with menace as she turned out the light. The city's hum faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of her own thoughts. The 4:50 killer, as the papers called him, thought himself clever, cloaked in shadows. and ciphers. But Miss Marple, with her quiet eyes and unyielding patience, was no stranger to shadows. She would follow the trail, step by careful step, until the viper's fangs were bared. Chapter 4. The 4:50 trap. The platform at King's Cross Station thrummed with the restless pulse of departure, a symphony of clattering footsteps and hissing steam. Miss Jane Marple stood near a tea-cart, her small frame dwarfed by the towering arches overhead. Her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, scanned the crowd boarding the 4:50 train to York. Her handbag held its usual arsenal: knitting needles, a notepad, the torn note from the auction house, but today it felt heavier, weighted by the stakes of the chase. The viper cuff-linked man, the pocket watch, the cryptic amulet, they were all converging here on this train, and Miss Marple intended to be ready. She spotted him almost immediately, the man from the auction house, his viper cufflink glinting as he adjusted his scarf. He travelled under an alias. She'd learned from Raymond's inquiries that he'd booked his ticket as Mr. Shatler's Vane. His real name, she suspected, was as false as his casual demeanour. He carried no satchel this time, only a slim briefcase, his movements precise, almost predatory. Miss Marple boarded a second-class carriage too, behind his first-class one, settling into a seat by the window. Her knitting emerged, a soft grey scarf, this time its rhythmic clicks a shield for her vigilance. The train jolted forward, slicing through London's outskirts into the patchwork fields beyond. Miss Marple's gaze flicked between her needles and the carriage door, half expecting Vane to appear. She recalled the torn note, for 50 King's Cross. Don't miss it. A rendezvous, no doubt, but for what? The pocket watch hadn't surfaced. At the auction, whisked away in the chaos of the fire alarm. Was it in Vane's briefcase, or was it waiting at the journey's end? An hour into the trip, Vane passed through her carriage, his eyes sweeping the passengers without lingering. Miss Marple kept her head down, her needles steady, but she caught his murmured words as he brushed past a porter. Final exchange. At Grantham, a small station 2 hours away, known for its quiet platform and easy access to the countryside. Her mind raced another delivery, another trap. She tucked the information away, her face serene as a vicar's wife at tea. The train's rhythm was soothing, but tension simmered beneath the surface. Miss Marple noticed a young woman in a navy coat, her hair tucked under a cloche hat, glancing nervously at her watch. She sat alone, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Something about her, perhaps the tightness of her jaw, reminded Miss Marple of Clara Henshaw, a courier, perhaps, or another pawn in the Viper's game. Miss Marple made a mental note to watch her. As the train neared Grantham, a sudden lurch threw passengers forward. A gunshot cracked, sharp and unmistakable, from the first-class carriage. Gasps rippled through the compartment, and Miss Marple rose, her knitting abandoned. She moved swiftly, her small frame weaving through the startled passengers toward the connecting door. The first-class carriage was in disarray. A window shattered, a man slumped in his seat, blood seeping from his shoulder. Not Vane he stood. In the aisle, his briefcase clutched tightly, his face a mask of cold calculation. "Stay back," the conductor shouted, kneeling beside the wounded man. "Someone fetch a doctor." Miss Marple's eyes darted to Vane. He was already moving, slipping toward the carriage door as the train slowed for Grantham. She followed at a distance, her steps light but purposeful. The platform was nearly deserted, the evening mist curling round the lampposts. Vane darted toward a waiting car, but in his haste, his briefcase caught on the doorframe. It fell, spilling papers and a small velvet pouch. He cursed, scrambling to retrieve them, but one paper skittered across the platform. Miss Marple, unnoticed, in the shadows, used her umbrella to snag the paper before it blew away. It was a map, hand-drawn, marking an abandoned manor house 10 miles from Grantham. She tucked it into her handbag, her heart pounding but her expression unchanged. Vane sped off in the car, leaving the platform empty save for the conductor's shouts and the distant wail of a police whistle. Back in the carriage, the wounded manor stranger, not Vane's target, was being tended by a passenger claiming to be a nurse. The police arrived, cordoning off the carriage and questioning passengers. Miss Marple, questioned briefly, offered a vague account of hearing the shot and seeing nothing unusual. But her eyes lingered on the young woman in the navy coat, who was now pale and trembling, her handkerchief shredded in her hands, when the police detained a burly man with a scarred face, claiming he'd fired the shot in a drunken brawl. Miss Marple's instincts rebelled. Too convenient, too neat. The real shooter, she suspected, was already gone. Vane, or someone he'd hired. The train was delayed at Grantham, giving Miss Marple time to think. The map pointed to the manor, a likely hiding place for the pocket watch or its secrets. The gunshot, she reasoned, was a distraction meant to clear Vane's path. But why the manor? And who was the woman in the navy coat so clearly rattled? Miss Marple approached her, her voice gentle as a summer breeze. "Are you quite all right, my dear?" she asked, offering a kind smile. "Such a dreadful shock." The woman started, her eyes wide. "Yes, I'm fine. Just ... shaken." Her voice was unsteady, her accent faintly northern. "Of course," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. "Travel can be so unpredictable. Were you meeting someone at Grantham, perhaps?" The woman's fingers tightened on her handkerchief. "No, no one. Just passing through." She stood abruptly, gathering her things, and hurried off the train. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind cataloguing the exchange. The woman knew something, but fear held her tongue. As the train resumed its journey, Miss Marple returned to her seat, the map burning a hole in her handbag. She wouldn't follow Vane tonight. The manor was too remote, too dangerous without preparation. Instead, she telephoned Raymond from Grantham Station, her voice calm but urgent. "Raymond, dear, I need you to look into an old manor house near Grantham, abandoned, likely, and find out if a woman in a navy coat, early 20s, northern accent, was connected to Clara Henshaw. She was on the 450 today." Raymond's voice crackled with curiosity. "Aunt Jane, you're neck-deep in this, aren't you?" "I'll get on it." Miss Marple hung up, her thoughts turning to the manor. It was the next piece of the puzzle, a place where secrets were hidden and deals were struck. The Viper Vane, or someone pulling his strings, was closing in on his prize, but Miss Marple was closing in on him. She settled back, her knitting, needles resuming their quiet dance. The 450 had been a trap, but not for her. She was the hunter now, and the manor would be her next battlefield. Chapter 5. Secrets in the manor. The moon hung low over the Lincolnshire countryside, casting a silver sheen across the frost-kissed fields. Miss Jane Marple, bundled in her warmest coat, stood at the edge of a rutted lane, her breath clouding in the chill night air. The abandoned manor house loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the sky, all broken windows and crumbling stone. The map from the 450 train had led her here, to this forgotten estate 10 miles from Grantham. She'd arrived by taxi, instructing the driver to wait at a discreet distance, her umbrella and handbag her only companions. No knitting tonight, her hands needed to be free. The manor's gates creaked as she pushed through, her steps silent on the overgrown path. Miss Marple's heart beat steadily, though she felt the weight of the place. A house that had once known grandeur, now a husk hiding secrets. The map had marked a specific wing, and she suspected the pocket watch or its true purpose. Within, Clara Henshaw's death, the auction house chaos, the gunshot on the trainal roads led here, to the Viper's lair. She slipped through a side entrance, the door ajar and splintered. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the sour temps of mildew. Her eyes adjusted to the dimness, guided by slivers of moonlight filtering through cracked shutters. The manor was a maze of shadowed corridors, but Miss Marple moved with purpose. Her memory of the map as sharp as her village gossip recall. She avoided the grand staircase, opting for a narrow servant's passage that wound toward the east wing. Voices stopped her cold low, urgent, echoing from a room ahead. She pressed against the wall, her small frame blending into the shadows. Peering through a gap in a rotting door, she saw a cavernous library, its shelves stripped bare save for cobwebs. A single lantern cast flickering light over a table where 3 figures stood: the viper-cuff-linked man, Charles Vane, the woman in furs from the auction house, and a third, a burly man with a scarred cheek. His voice gruff as he argued. "The watch is secure," Vane said, his tone sharp. "But we can't move it yet, not with the police sniffing around after that train fiasco." The woman in furs slammed a hand on the table. "You botched it, Vane." The buyer's impatient. "If we don't deliver by tomorrow's 4:50, we lose everything." Miss Marple's breath caught. Tomorrow's 4:50. Another train, another deadline. She edged closer, her eyes scanning the table. There it was, the pocket watch, its gold case gleaming in the lantern's glow. Beside it lay a small metal tool, like a watchmaker's key, and a stack of papers. She strained to hear more. The scarred man growled. Clara was a loose end. Her sister's the problem now. She knows too much. Miss Marple's mind raced. Sister, the woman in the navy coat. From the train, her nervous glances, her shredded handkerchief. Clara's sister, caught in the same deadly web. Before she could process this, a floorboard creaked under her foot. The voices stopped. Vane's head snapped toward the door. "Who's there?" he barked, his hand slipping to his coat pocket. Miss Marple's heart thudded, but her mind was clear. She stepped back, melting into the passage, her umbrella raised like a shield. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. She ducked into an alcove, barely breathing, as the scarred man passed, a pistol glinting in his hand. He didn't see. Her few ever did. When the footsteps faded, Miss Marple crept toward the library. The room was empty now, the lantern gone, but the watch remained on the table, as if forgotten in their haste. She approached, her fingers brushing the cold metal. The inscription Viper was unmistakable, but something else caught her eye, a tiny seam along the case's edge. With a glance at the door, she pressed it. A click, and the back sprang open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a tightly rolled strip of microfilm, no larger than a matchstick. Her pulse quickened. Microfilm secrets worth killing for. She slipped it into her handbag, replacing the watch exactly as she'd found it. As she turned to leave, a shadow loomed in the doorway. The woman in furs stood there, her eyes blazing. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. "You're no thief." Miss Marple's expression softened, her voice tremulous. "Oh, my dear, I'm just a lost old lady. I heard this place was abandoned and thought to explore such a mistake." In the dark, the woman's gaze narrowed, but Miss Marple's frail appearance worked its magic. "Get out," she snapped, "before you regret it." Miss Marple nodded, shuffling toward the door, her umbrella tapping the floor. But as she passed, she caught the woman's scent jasmine, sharp and expensive, and a glimpse of a locket around her neck, engraved with a C. Clara's sister, she realized, her heart sinking. Not a conspirator, but a betrayed ally, seeking answers in a deadly game. Outside, the taxi waited, its engine idling. Miss Marple climbed in, her face calm but her mind a whirlwind. The mic was the key, not the watch itself, but what it hid. As the car wound through the dark lanes, she pieced together the puzzle. Clara killed for delivering the watch. Her sister, now entangled with the Viper's crew. Vane, a cog in a larger machine. The microfilm, she suspected, held secrets beyond antiques, plans, betrayals. At Grantham's small inn, she locked herself in her room and examined the microfilm under a borrowed magnifying glass. It was too small to read without equipment, but she glimpsed rows of tiny text names, dates, locations, a list, perhaps, of spies or operatives. She hid it in the lining of her knitting bag, her safest vault, and telephoned Raymond. "Raymond, dear," she said, her voice steady despite the hour, "I need you to meet me in London tomorrow. Bring a contact who can read microfilm discreetly. And check on a woman, Clara Henshaw's sister, likely in her 20s, northern accent. She's in danger." Raymond's voice was a mix of awe and concern. "Aunt Jane, you're in over your head. I'll be there by morning." Miss Marple hung up, her gaze drifting to the window. The manor had been a den of vipers, but she had slipped through their coils. The microfilm was her trump card, but the game wasn't over. The 4:50 tomorrow loomed, and with it, the Viper's next move. She lay down, her mind stitching together the clues: the sister's locket, Vane's briefcase, the scarred man's pistol. The manor had yielded its secret, but at a cost. Sister was now a target, and Miss Marple would not let another life be lost. As dawn crept over the horizon, she closed her eyes, her resolve unshaken. The Viper thought he held the board, but Miss Marple was already planning her checkmate. Chapter 6. The Viper's Lair, the dining car of the 4:50 train to Edinburgh, shimmered with the elegance of a bygone era-polished wood panelling, crisp white tablecloths, and the soft clink of crystal glasses. Miss Jane Marple sat at a corner table, her knitting a delicate laced shawl that draped across her lap like a prop in a play. Her eyes, however, were anything but idle, scanning the carriage with the precision of a hawk. The microfilm, safely hidden in her knitting bag's false bottom, weighed heavily on her mind. Its contentious list of spies embedded in London's elite, she now knew, thanks to Raymond's discreet contact, were dynamite, and the Viper was poised to sell them on this very train. She'd learned from Raymond that the woman in furs was indeed Clara Henshaw's sister, Eleanor, driven by grief and vengeance to infiltrate the Viper's circle. Eleanor's locket, engraved with a C, had been a gift from Clara, a clue to her identity. Miss Marple had also confirmed Charles Vane's role, not the Viper himself, but a trusted lieutenant tasked with delivering the microfilm to a buyer at Edinburgh. The real Viper, Raymond's sources whispered, was a diplomat named Sir Alistair Crane, a man of impeccable reputation and hidden ruthlessness. Tonight, Miss Marple would end his game. She sipped her tea, her gaze settling on Vane, seated 3 tables away. His viper cufflink gleamed under the chandelier's glow, and his briefcase rested at his feet, no doubt containing a decoy to throw off any watchers. Eleanor sat across from him, her fur stole replaced by a simple black dress, her face pale, but composed. Miss Marple admired her courage, but feared her recklessness. The scarred man from the manor was absent, likely the shooter from Grantham. Now in custody, a convenient scapegoat, Miss Marple had planned her trap with care. Raymond, stationed in the next carriage, had alerted a trusted inspector from Scotland Yard, who waited at the rear of the train. The key was to catch Vane and Crane if he appeared in the act, with the microfilm as evidence. She'd slipped a note to Eleanor via a porter, urging her to play along but stay safe. Now she waited, her knitting needles clicking a steady rhythm. Vane rose, briefcase in hand, and moved toward the end of the dining car, where a private compartment awaited. Eleanor followed, her steps hesitant. Miss Marple tucked her knitting away and stood, her umbrella a silent ally. She trailed them, her small frame slipping unnoticed through the crowded aisle. The private compartment's door was ajar, and she caught Vane's voice, low and urgent. "The buyer's here," he said. "Hand over the film, and we're done." Eleanor's voice trembled, but held firm. "Not until I know why Clara died. You promised answers." Miss Marple peered through the gap. A third figure sat in the shadow stall, silver-haired, with a diplomat's poise. Sir Alistair Crane, the Viper himself. His voice was smooth as silk. "Clara was careless, my dear. She threatened to expose us. You, however, can still walk away if you cooperate." Miss Marple's heart quickened. She signalled Raymond through a prearranged tap on the window, her umbrella's handle clicking against the glass. Then, with a boldness that belied her frail appearance, she pushed open the door and stepped inside. "Oh dear me," she said, her voice quavering. "I seem to have lost my way. Is this the dining car?" Vane whirled, his hand reaching for his pocket, but Crane raised a hand, his smile cold. "No need for alarm, Mr. Vane. Just an old lady easily confused." Miss Marple's eyes widened innocently, but her words cut like a blade. "Not so confused, Sir Alistair. I believe you're expecting a delivery, microfilm, perhaps. One worth killing for." Crane's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her locket. Vane lunged, but Miss Marple was ready, her umbrella jabbing his shin with surprising force. He stumbled, cursing, as the compartment door burst open. Raymond and the inspector stormed in, pistols drawn. "Hands up, Crane," the inspector barked. "You're under arrest for espionage and murder." Crane's composure cracked, his face twisting with fury. "You have nothing," he spat, but his eyes darted to Vane's briefcase. Betraying him, Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Oh, but we do. The microfilm, Sir Alistair. I found it in the manor, hidden in that clever pocket. Watch. It's with the authorities now, along with your list of spies." Eleanor's eyes widened, tears brimming. "You knew about Clara." Miss Marple nodded gently. "She was brave, my dear, and so are you." Vane lunged again, but Raymond tackled him, pinning him to the floor. The inspector cuffed Crane, who sat in stunned silence, his empire crumbling. The microfilm handed over to the Yard earlier that day was already being decoded, its secrets unraveling a network that stretched from London to Berlin as the train slowed for its next stop. Miss Marple returned to her seat, her knitting resumed. Eleanor joined her, her face a mix of relief and grief. "Thank you," she whispered, "for Clara." Miss Marple patted her hand. "Justice is a small comfort, but it's something." The police cleared the compartment, and the train rolled on, its rhythm soothing. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to St. Mary Mead, to her garden and her quiet evenings. The viper was caged, his fangs pulled. The dining car, once a stage for treachery, was now just a carriage carrying her toward home. She smiled, her needles clicking softly. The 450 had been a battlefield, but she'd played her part and won. The shawl grew under her hands, each stitch a quiet victory, as the train carried her into the night. Chapter 7. The Final Stitch. The late afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, its rays filtering through the laced curtains of Miss Jane Marple's sitting room at Dame Mead Cottage. She sat in her favourite armchair, a tray of tea and lavender shortbread on the table beside her. The familiar scent of roses drifted in from the garden, mingling with the faint crackle of the fire. Her knitting, a soft cream blanket for the church bazaar, lay across her lap, her needles moving with the steady rhythm of a life well ordered. Yet her mind, sharp as ever, lingered on the events of the past weeks. The 450 train, Clara murder, the viper's unmasking. The puzzle was solved, the threads tied, but Miss Marple knew the echoes of such cases lingered like shadows. The newspapers had moved on from the 450 killer, their headlines now chasing a fresh scandal. Sir Alistair Crane, the viper, was in custody, his spy ring dismantled thanks to the microfilm Miss Marple had secured. Charles Vane, his lieutenant, had turned informant, spilling secrets to lighten his sentence. Eleanor Henshaw, Clara's sister, was safe, mourning but free from the viper's grasp. The pocket watch, its hidden compartment empty, had been returned to the Henshaw family, a bittersweet relic of Clara's courage. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her thoughts drifting to a conversation over breakfast with her friend Dolly Bantry. Dolly, ever fond of drama, had leaned across the table, her eyes wide. "Jane, you're a marvel. Uncovering spies on a train, of all places. It's like something out of one of Raymond's novels." Miss Marple had smiled, deflecting with a murmur about luck and observation. "People are much the same, Dolly, whether in St. Mary Mead or on a train. They carry their secrets, and secrets have a way of showing themselves." Now, alone in her sitting room, she reflected on that truth. Clara's death had seemed a senseless act, but it mirrored a scandal years ago in the villager jealous gardener, a stolen brooch, a betrayal exposed by a misplaced letter. Human nature, Miss Marple mused, was a tapestry of greed, loyalty, and fear, woven in patterns that repeated across time and place. The viper had thought himself untouchable, cloaked in wealth and power, but he'd underestimated the quiet tenacity of an old lady with a knack for noticing. A knock at the door broke her reverie. It was Mrs. Pemberton, the vicar's wife, her cheeks flushed from the autumn chill. "Miss Marple, I've brought the parish newsletter," she said, bustling in. "And oh, there's talk of a new family moving into the old manor. Can you imagine, after all those years?" Miss Marple nodded, offering a shortbread. "A fresh start for the place, perhaps. It's seen enough shadows." Mrs. Pemberton chattered on, but Miss Marple's thoughts wandered to the manor near Grantham, its dusty library and hidden secrets. It was empty now, its ghosts laid to rest. She wondered if Eleanor would find peace, perhaps in time to heal the wounds left by Clara's loss. As evening settled, Miss Marple lit a lamp and opened a letter that had arrived that morning. It was from Eleanor, written in a steady hand. Dear Miss Marple, I cannot thank you enough for what you did. Clara's memory is clearer now, not shadowed by anger or fear. The watch is on my mantle, a reminder of her bravery. I'm moving north to start anew. You gave me that chance. Yours, Eleanor Hensham. Miss Marple folded the letter, her heart warmed by its words. She tucked it into a drawer, alongside other keepsakes, mementos of cases solved, lives touched. The blanket grew under her needles, each stitch a quiet act of creation, a counterpoint to the destruction she'd unraveled. Outside, the village settled into dusk, the church bell tolling softly. Miss Marple rose, crossing to the window. The sunset painted the sky in hues of amber and rose, a canvas of calm. No trains rumbled tonight, no ciphers waited to be decoded. The viper's game was over, his secrets laid bare. She thought of Clara, her life cut short, and Eleanor, who would carry on. Justice, as she'd told Eleanor, was a small comfort, but it was enough. She returned to her chair, her knitting a steady companion. The world beyond St. Mary Mead would always have its mysteries, its vipers lurking in the shadows. But here, in her quiet corner, Miss Marple was content. The puzzle was complete, the final stitch sewn. She smiled, her eyes bright with the peace of a job well done, and watched the last light fade from the sky.